Understanding the decade of the 1920s is super important when you're trying to analyze the decade of the 1930s. It's been a while since I posted on here. I've been super busy, but I wanted to briefly talk about the 1920s. So, oftentimes in history classes, we go right from the end of the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles and kind of fast forward right into the 1930s, and we kind of just forget about the decade of the 1920s and really forget about the League of Nations and all of the good that it did do in that decade. Now, we know that it ultimately failed because there was a Second World War, but we don't really understand why it was so successful, how it was so successful, and then why it failed as rapidly as it did. In order to really understand the decade of the 1920s, you have to understand the prosperity that ensued, right? When countries are trading, when they're mutually beneficial trade relationships happening between major countries around the world, war is going to become very unlikely, right? And so the general idea, the principle that the League of Nations was founded on was collective security, right? It is all of our jobs to prevent the next war from happening. And when things were as prosperous as they were in the roaring 20s or the golden 20s, if you're looking at it from a European perspective, war was not going to happen again, right? So a saying that I like to tell my students is that World War One, a primary cause of it was countries acted in self-interest. They didn't care about the collective. They were doing what was right for them in that moment in time. You could give examples of Britain, of Austria, of Germany, of numerous countries acting in their own self-interest. But in the 20s, we switched to this idea of the collective as being the governing ideology of these countries. And they were willing to say, listen, this was the war to end all wars. We are going to start thinking as a whole, as this kind of the beginning of globalization, really. And the thing that helped that happen was the prosperity. In late 1929, that prosperity goes away, and you instantly see this flip from collective thinking back to self interest. And that's what fuels a lot of the motivation of the 1930s in countries like Germany, in countries like Japan, and countries like Italy. So, again, when you're studying history, understanding the 1920s is almost as important as analyzing the 1930s. Hope that helped. See you soon.